In the last 4 months, 100 Huntley Street has been tracking proposed expansions to medical assistance in dying MAID laws slated for March 2024. This will allow Canadians to apply for MAID if their sole underlying condition is related to mental health issues. Joining me now for an important update on this national issue is lawyer and executive director of Christian Legal Fellowship, Derek Ross. Welcome to 100 Huntley Street, Derek.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks for joining us again. Derek, since you were here last and we were talking about the expansion of MAID laws in Canada coming up this March 2024, what have the developments been?
Well, there certainly have been some developments, and maybe just to recap for folks that aren't familiar, medical assistance in dying or medically administered death is only available if someone has what's called a grievous and irremediable condition. And initially that was understood to really be applying to individuals who had terminal conditions, or in the words of the legislation, their death was reasonably foreseeable. They were dying, and that's why we called it medical assistance in dying. But in 2021, that law changed, and that requirement that someone be on the passage to death was removed. And that meant that all of a sudden now people could access MAID even if they weren't dying and even if their condition would not cause their death. And so the concern was, what does this mean for mental illness? And initially, 3 years ago, the government said that mental illness would not be considered a grievous and irremediable condition. But now that's going to change. And so in March of 2024, a mental illness can qualify as a grievous and irremediable condition. Now, since we last chatted, there was a vote, and Parliament was asking, should we put the brakes on this? And it was very close. It was 167 to 150 that decided to proceed with MAID for mental illness. So what that means is that unless Parliament intervenes, and they still might, that as of March 2024, a person with a mental illness or a psychiatric condition can ask to have their life ended by a medically administered death, and it will be up to their doctors to determine whether or not they're eligible.
Now, since MAID became legal in Canada, we've had 45,000 Canadians end their life using MAID. And since 2020, there's been a 30% increase in those who are applying for MAID. Derek, what are some of the mental health issues that we might see someone apply for MAID under?
Yeah, and just to clarify, it's been 30% each year that has increased, year over year, since 2019. So we've seen this expand significantly. As far as the conditions that will qualify, that's part of the concern. That's not spelled out in the legislation. So again, it will be largely up to medical professionals to interpret whether a particular condition meets the criteria. But already there's discussion, and it's been presented that this could apply to clinical depression, to anxiety disorders, even to eating disorders, to obsessive compulsive disorder, to post-traumatic stress disorder, even to substance use and addictive disorders, if they are seen as being serious and incurable. And so we see now that this really opens the door to a whole new space where a lot of people might not think that this is what medical assistance in dying has really been designed to do. And there's a huge debate, even amongst healthcare and mental health experts, as to whether they can ever say with certainty that a mental health condition is irremediable, because we know that there are situations and cases where someone can improve. And so how can we make this permanent decision, this life-ending decision, when we can't necessarily have that certainty? Those are some of the issues that are being debated right now.
Wow. And, you know, there was a recent article in it. We were chatting about it earlier, but there was a man who applied for MAID and he did receive it. It's because he was unable to get treatment as a cancer patient. And so there was this hopelessness, and there was this not wanting to be a burden on society. There were a lot of themes running through there. Share with us a bit more about what is behind so many who apply for MAID. What are they feeling? What does it say about society and what's happening around us in our communities? For
sure. Well, in that case, I think is a really poignant and heartbreaking example of how MAID is not, our laws have not really been designed in a way that ensures that MAID is a last resort. The only requirement in terms of this issue is that a doctor inform patients that there are alternative treatments available. There's no requirement that a patient have to fully explore those alternative treatments, or even that they must have access to them. And we know from the reports that we see each year that hundreds of Canadians thus far have died by MAID who had no access to palliative care or to disability support services. And those same reports also share some really concerning data. They tell us that thousands of Canadians, in last year alone, in 2022 alone, thousands of Canadians chose MAID in part because they felt they were a burden on others. And so to answer your question, I think that is the question, is what kind of society helps people end their lives because they feel they are a burden on others or because they're experiencing profound isolation and loneliness? And those are the questions that we really need to be wrestling with as a culture and as a country.
We certainly do need to be wrestling with those questions as people of faith and also as citizens in Canada. How are we taking care of the most vulnerable and those who are marginalized? Derek, last time you were with us, we had a call to action for our viewers to say, here's something you can do. And earlier in our conversation today, you mentioned that these laws could still be shifted. We could still see an overturning of MAID being expanded to include those with mental health issues. What can our viewers do? What is another step we can do right now? It's part of why we're having you on in the Christmas season. We know time is of the essence, and this is incredibly important.
Well, the beauty of Canada is that despite our shortcomings, we are a democracy. We are a country where we have the right, and I would say the duty, to express our concerns to our elected representatives when we feel there are laws that are causing harm or injustice. And so people that are concerned about this issue would encourage them to become more informed. They can check out our website to find out some of the things that we've submitted. There's a special committee that's studying this issue right now. And to call their MP and set up a time, not just to write to them, but even have a conversation with them to share their concerns respectfully. And finally, as you say, this is Christmas season, and this is a season where, at its core, we're reminded of hope. And I think central to this debate is a sense of hopelessness, that people feel that they don't have hope. And so I think we need to ask ourselves as a faith community, as families, as the organizations and communities that we're part of, how can we best advance that message of hope and ensure that we're not giving up on anyone, that we can present to them and redouble our efforts to support communities and programs that are helping those that are struggling, so that we can always say we won't give up on anyone. Even if your condition is one that we can't technically cure, there are ways to find hope and dignity and meaning in life and purpose, because we want every person and need every person to be a part of our community.
Oh, Derek, so encouraging and so thankful that you've joined us here today. Thankful that our viewers have a strong call to action on what they can do. Please contact your MPs, and also don't forget to reach out to those around you who may be isolated or alone this Christmas to encourage them. And later in today's program, we're going to have a time of prayer with Derek and with you to pray for those who are struggling with this very serious issue of MAID in Canada.